right, Quentin, welcome to the Founding AE podcast. Super excited to have you on today.
Hey, Justin. Yeah, likewise. Very stoked to get the conversation rolling.
Awesome. Well, I really want to dig in. There's some interesting experience that you have both selling into a existing category like HR that I'm super interested in unpacking with you, but also selling into the UK market or being based in the UK as a startup. I'm super interested in hearing how the startup scene is over there and all that good stuff. But before we dive in, maybe for those that are listening that don't know much about you, why don't you give a little bit of a career background and how you ended up at Zelt as a founding AE?
Yes, of course. So I'm Quentin. I've been working in sales now for the past 8 years. Started as a SDR, made my way up. I worked across several industries, so anywhere from HR to hospitality tech. Then I worked as well into more of a specific segment of HR, which was workforce management. And yeah, I had the opportunity to meet my CEO at Zelt with this exciting new role. I know HR can be a bit unsexy, as a lot of people like to put it, but there's a lot of things that are happening within this space, which is super exciting. I think there's a lot of changing parts with now the rise of AI and other bits that are coming to market. And HR is such a interesting space when it comes to the reach of it and how much impact it can have for companies. So happy to go into all of that with you now.
Awesome. And maybe talk a little bit about the company size stage. So you're founding AE. Do you have any support in terms of SDRs or marketing counterparts or anything like that?
Yeah, so we've actually just hired 4 SDRs 2 weeks ago. So they are within their ramp up period. Right as of now, I was the first sales with my CEO. He was doing a bit more founder sales up to now. I came in about 7 months ago, just building the playbook, building the foundations to which now my SDRs have been using, and trying to scale. So it's been super exciting to see them already booked quite a meeting for us. So yeah, it's definitely an exciting time.
Very cool. And are the SDRs based in the UK as well as most of the team local there?
Yeah, so the company itself, so we're all based in Victoria, which is central London, and we are in the WeWork, which is quite close to the train station there.
Awesome. Well, it's funny because I was in London this summer and it had been a while since I had been in London. And, I live in the Silicon Valley bubble, right? Where we tend to
Right.
think this is the only place that startups get started, right? And I went to meet with actually my old company that I had worked with, for 10 years previously, where I was a founding AE and kind of worked my way up at a WeWork actually over there. They're based here in the US, but they have a pretty strong London presence too.
Mm.
And I'm always reminded that, there's these ecosystems out there, whether it be New York, London, Paris as well,
Yeah.
where there's a lot of startups. Curious to get your take. How do you feel the London startup scene is? Was it easy for you to find SDRs or people that sort of knew the startup game and that you could feel, could hit the ground running, create an impact early? Or is there a lot of education you have to do when it comes to SaaS in particular and how SaaS companies work?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, just to give a bit more context around, I guess, the London startup scene, I think after the US, for any US companies that like to penetrate the European market, I always think that London is always their first stop. Of course, due to the common language, I'd say there's certain cultural aspects which are very similar. So we have a lot of US companies that, once they're mature enough in the US market, they tend to cross over and start out in London. So I guess in terms of opportunities, that's always been good. It's always quite, I would say, easy enough in terms of finding, US first companies or companies that are US backed in that aspect. And in terms of the the SaaS market itself, I would say it's always been a bit 10 years a bit behind, or 5 years, I would say, to the US. I think what's already been working well in the US slowly comes a bit later in the UK, and then of course afterwards I'd say with the rest of mainland Europe. So there's always been a bit of a gap in adoption. Um, I'd say the biggest, I'd say, contrast or differences in terms of selling into the UK market is, although there's quite a lot of similarities, I think the in the UK people tend to be a bit more less transactional and a bit less commercial in the sense where any new deal, any new conversation is quite firstly focused around the product and the outcome of any sort of new solution rather than just being having the best deal, trying to getting forced into buying a new software, and people are a bit more resistant to change as well. I think in the US, there's a lot more early adopters. If we look at big tech companies, should be AI, or even in our space like Rippling, which were very much in the forefront of the HR transformation change. I think in the UK, it takes a little bit more time to penetrate market just to those I'd say buying barriers which are a bit higher across this side of the pond.
Yeah, it's interesting. Actually, are you selling primarily into the UK, Europe, or are you also selling into US as well?
So at the moment, our core focus is the UK, some regions in Europe, and then the GCC region, which is the Middle East.
Mm.
We haven't attacked the US market just yet, just because of it can be quite complex with all the state laws and local laws, and it's closer for us to speak to people on this side rather than stay out too late to start calling people in the US. So yeah, we do have a lot to eat and bite for. So yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I always find when you're selling into the US market, we almost have it easy in a way because sure, states have different regulations and so on, and there's also slightly different cultures, but we have sort of this unified American culture
Yeah.
where it becomes quite easy to repeat the same sales process or sales approach, right? In your case, it sounds like you're selling into the UK, you're selling into European countries. Each of those European countries probably have their own cultures. When you get into like the Middle East selling too, that's completely different ball game in terms of
Sure.
cultures. Is that something that you had a background in, that you were familiar with the different cultures in all these different regions that you're selling into? Is it something that you've had to learn and adapt? And I'm just curious to hear how you approached that challenge.
Yes. Well, firstly, I'm French, so it does help having being bilingual in
Yeah,
being able to sell within the French market, which is in itself quite large. It's Switzerland, France,
yeah,
Benelux. So I think altogether it's almost 90 million people within the Eurozone. But of course, if you look at the broader market itself, I guess you have Western Europe, or sorry, Southern Europe. I think a lot there. It's mostly, I guess, you can include France as well in that pool, which is a lot more focused around relationship building. It's a lot more trying to trust the people behind the software rather than just the direct impact, and trying to have the best commercial team. I think people also buy in teams a lot more. Whereas I guess if you take examples like the Nordics or Germany, it's all about compliance, efficiency, very much trying to have all of those regulations, GDPR, very focused approach first. So there's definitely some nuances and things there. In terms of the way to adapt, I think itself, London is quite a melting pot in itself. So you do have people from everywhere. So it's something that you kind of learn with other colleagues and people. So I think we were quite versed in the understanding, the cultural differences. And like you said, it's for us, it's quite easy to go from one place to another. Where in the US, as you probably know, in 5 hour flight, you're still in the same country. So it's yeah, it's relatively easy in that sense.
for sure. It's interesting as you're speaking. I'm having these flashbacks to when I was building an SDR team. I was based here in the US, but building the team globally, and I was hiring people in France, in our Paris office and our London office, and I remember, luckily, I had some really great SDRs that I hired early that were very honest with me too.
Yeah.
And they were basically like, listen, like, I'm writing the sequences and the emails and all that stuff. And they're like, some of these wouldn't fly in Europe, the just the tone and sort of the directness in terms of like the business focus from the very beginning in
Mm,
certain European countries, you need to warm people up and you need to approach things differently. Same thing with the demo script, right? So I
mm,
really leaned on the team to help me sort of adapt that. So you're totally right. The European market is so interesting in that way. But to your point, being in London, you get exposed to a lot of that. So I guess it becomes natural to transition it from your sort of personal life, being intermingled with a bunch of people from different
mm.
cultures and different places to the professional life, which makes it a lot easier. You mentioned HR as a space, right? And I know you joked that it's an unsexy space. When you look at the numbers and you look at the amount of revenue that some of these companies are doing, I would say it's far from unsexy, right? It's a huge market, right? But with that, there's established players, right? And mixed in, like you said, some a little bit more conservative nature, both in terms of the the countries maybe that you're selling to, but also the legal and compliance that
Yeah.
lives around HR tech. As a new startup, how do you approach that, right? Like, I'm assuming you're selling to a persona that is a little bit more conservative in general, and then suddenly you're saying, hey, listen, I know you've been using this established player
Mm.
for decades. How do you unseat them, or do you go after a market that maybe isn't entrenched with the bigger players? I'm curious your approach to that.
Yeah, so like you said, there's definitely different segments. Obviously, you have the big, huge players like Workday or Oracle or SAP, which really go for the large enterprise players, which we're not quite there yet as a business, but eventually, that's definitely the end goal to go and tackle those sort of businesses. But even before that, I think there's definitely, and I think where we fit in as a business and where we've seen the most transformation, maybe around HR, is there's definitely a new role that's coming around a lot more, which is the people operations manager rather than
Mm,
just the HR manager or the HR business partner, where I think traditionally HR has been seen as more of a cost center, something which, they do build paperwork, they just look at the culture. There was Drive that's in the late 2010s where HR was really much around, how do you create or empower your people? How do you drive people to stay and perform better? Which is still, quite an important aspect of their role. But I think as we go now post COVID and post mid 2020s now, I think the huge transformation that we're seeing is in that new role where they're trying to look at HR more of an efficiency to the business and how they can run the operations a lot more focus around how can we make HR efficient? How can we reduce time for onboarding? How can we get to productivity quicker? How can we transform the HR function to be more of a efficiency first department for the business? So I think that's how we tried and how I think we've seen the trend and how a lot of companies also looking to see HR. Now, I would say it's quite a small segment of the overall HR, I would say, global perception of the department, but I think we're slowly getting there. And I think when we speak and trying to challenge people, so I think it's a lot more around how can we position this new approach, how can we guide them and educate them into this transformation. And I think a lot of people do appreciate, particularly in early conversations, when we can approach, how you qualifying their how much time it takes them to do not only just onboarding but like the performance, how much time it takes them to have all those separate systems trying to run together in such siloed ways where a lot of their you'd be surprised to know how many HR people end up just looking through and cross-checking data that should automatically be pushed through. So it's always a question of a balancing act of trying to educate the market, but at the same time trying to challenge the status quo for them to embrace a bit this new change, to really have what we call lean companies that start with a HR function.
Yeah, it's actually fascinating because I've never sold into the HR space, but I'm seeing a lot of the same parallels in the spaces that I have sold into, where you've found this new role that's been created, and I think this is like very key for founding AEs listening into this. Like, how do the questions? How do you find an entry point in these established categories? Well, a lot of these categories get to a point where a new role is created. I'll give a recent example in my space, the sales space. The GTM engineer, right, or the
Yeah.
RevOps person, right. At one point, it was the SDR, right. It was a new function that had emerged, and then all this tech got built around it, right. I sold into marketing, and influencer marketing became a thing, and the influencer marketing manager became this role, right, where there's an open space. Like you said, it's not the entire addressable market in HR, but it's this sort of wedge that you can make your way into. And then the second piece beyond finding that role is finding the measurable outcome that you can generate for that person. And it sounds like there's a transformation going on in HR, like you've pointed out, where you're going from, maybe, I don't want to say fluffy, but like softer sort of metrics like employee happiness, which are all very important. No, not trying to say it's not, but to things like ramp up efficiency and like, productivity and all these much more measurable categories. So it's very interesting to hear. And I guess maybe talk a little bit about this idea, or this sort of this decision to now hire SDRs. What makes this the right time for that? Is that because you found your persona, you found sort of your story, you found the playbook that's working, and you need to scale it up? What's sort of the timing that made you feel like, what, now's the time for SDRs?
Yeah, all and the above. I think it's definitely a good time in the sense where the market is so large, where there's so much that we can go after, and having those extra headcounts that can focus on the lead generation aspects um, allows us then to organize and segment our sales process a lot better and focus a lot more on what we can control for each of these roles. So obviously with the SDRs, it's being able to generate meetings. For my role, is focusing on my closing rates and time to close, so that as we scale our business, we can be a lot more quantifiable in terms of how we look at improving our performance. And as we try to onboard new reps, as we will, I'm sure, be growing quite shortly. So having all those, best practices in place, having us that potential and lean growth aspect to our role. And having them, come in now is important. As for the last 6-7 months, we've been transitioning from this founder-led sales to me arriving, to trying out different approaches, finding what's work. And obviously it's just one of me, but having 4x the capacity allows us to go 4x quicker. So I think now we've had some good wins, and there's just being able to ramp up this the process that's been working, or define ICP, and just trying to make things go quicker.
Any insights for people listening on how you've managed to get your foot in the door with some of these prospects? Right now, you've identified the ICP. Any tools or resources that you're using to start those conversations that's worked? And then on the other side of the coin, you mentioned, so like now the SDRs are booking meetings, you're trying to increase that close rate. Anything in particular that you're working on, or that you found that is a strong lever in the closing side of the coin too?
So on the SDR side of front, I wouldn't say there's any one particular tool. I think what's quite important for us, particularly in HR, because we're setting such a transformation element to business, is that we focus a lot more on buying signals that can indicate a change inside a business. And I think with HR, a lot of it is linked to new funding rounds, acquisitions, mergers. So having the right tools set up to look for buying signals is such an important thing, particularly in an industry where it's very much saturated, where people only, for us at least, as we're changing so much of their operations. So having the right intent signals set up with the right systems in place for that helps us be at the right place at the right time. So a lot of my initial outreach was focused on that and finding the right signals that were working for us. And then in terms of the actual closing elements of it is, what can we bring to the sales process that allows, I guess, a prospect to see our approach in a way where they can understand the value, and but also feel at the same time feel challenged to understand a bit more as to, what have they been doing the right way. So having, being able to prescribe a lot more, also to be run deeper diagnostic in terms of how the operation works, and try and give them that same sort of vision that we have, so that they can bring back, real business cases internally that is linked to the transformation changes that they like to bring to their businesses.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, I think a lot of that what you just talked about, I can see this becoming key levers for sales, right? Like the
Mm,
signals, I think, has become a huge tool set that didn't exist. I remember when we were doing,
mm,
when I was building an SDR team, we didn't have those tools that sort of let you know, hey, somebody just raised a funding round, or they just
yeah,
hired a new head of HR, and so on. So I could see that totally being an interesting new tool set that you can leverage. And then to your point, anything that you can do to remove friction, build that confidence, that this is not just something that you're pitching, but that is going to be a reality for them if they adopt your technology, right? Whether
yeah.
it's case studies or business cases and things like that, makes a lot of sense. Taking a little bit of a step back to like your career ambition. So what I find interesting about your background is I saw, you're an SDR, you worked your way into an AE role. Now you're in a founding AE role. Where do you see yourself going, and kind of thinking about like, what are the career prospects for somebody that's in a founding AE role? Is this something that you think is a great segue into another area of the business? Like I've seen some founding AEs get into marketing, product marketing. That's
Hmm.
something that I did myself, or eventually founding their own company. I've seen other founding AEs go into like sales management. I've seen other founding AEs that just love the chase of the deal, and they want to be a
Yeah.
founding AE over and over again. What do you think is like the path for a founding AE career wise?
I mean, from what you said, all the above are an option, right? I do feel there's a good segue to so many types of careers and pathways for anyone that's looking to firstly build their own business. I think you work so close to your CEO, to the product team, to the marketing team, to the support teams, that you really see how to run a business from A to Z. So for anyone who's looking to really start and build their business, I think this would be the perfect sort of role. But then for myself in particular, I feel, there's so much potential in Zelt that I see myself, growing with the company. With such an early stage, it's hard to predict exactly where I see myself go. But right now, I think there's a lot more that we can do on the sales side. So I think for the short term, at least, scaling the function, I've helped quite a little bit in getting our SDRs up and running. So there's definitely some leadership, I think, aspects that we can have. But yeah, the great thing is just so many opportunities that are open for me with Zelt. So there's definitely so much I think I can learn and see how things evolve really.
Yeah, it's such a exciting role, to be honest, because you're building as you're doing, right? Which is so unique. I think there's not a lot of roles that give you that opportunity to do both. It's usually
Mm,
you're sort of doing or you're managing, right? And this is
yeah,
sort of like you've got one foot in each side, as well as stretched across many different adjacent departments.
for sure.
Um, as we wrap up, I have one sort of new segment I wanted to try out, which is just like a rapid fire
Yeah.
3 questions, right? One win that you're really proud of so far at your time at Zelt. One mistake that you wouldn't repeat, that you've learned from, and next time around, this is something that you're
Yeah.
going to avoid. And one piece of advice for a first time founding AEs that you think would really just set them up for success as they take on the new role.
Yeah, certainly. So one win that I'm very proud of, definitely one of, it was a care group that I recently closed, completely outbound. My first proper, I'd say, quite large company. There are about 150 employees. So for a company our size, it's relatively big in terms as to who we have as a company. And I think that the balancing act there was a lot of the things that they were asking weren't quite yet ready. So it's a bit selling that vision, but also trying to get them the product roadmap tailored at the same time as we were bringing things along. So a lot of the time we had to ask our designer to have a click demo of what we're going to bring, and then ensuring that, look, not only are we trying to deliver on the promise, but ensure it is ready for them to use when they're looking to fully onboard. So it's managing working with different teams, with the product, with the customer, with my CEO to try and sell that value and that vision. So I think for us that was quite a important win, and also a very good win for myself. In terms of the mistake, I'd say it's very important to be able to learn what to disqualify on. I think sometimes every time because there's quite a lot of rejection in the sense where we're so new that at the beginning when we heard yeses around, oh yeah, we like to learn more, we like to understand a bit more to run the product, but trying to always stick to the same framework on how you qualify in, but also how you qualify out. I think it's important to, sell or at least have a product fit that works really well within one certain ICP, and trying to focus a lot more on that as you scale up rather than trying to please everyone. And I think not having a good framework for that can bog you down otherwise. So being able to qualify in quickly and qualify out as well is important. And I guess a piece of advice for any future founding AEs, I think it's definitely a long-term game where, as there's no playbook, as there's no anything set in stone, you're there to really build things. So there's a lot of experimentation. So you really need to come in with a mindset of, this is a blank canvas. So again, if you're desperately chasing your next commission check, I wouldn't say it's the fastest route, but you do have such influence on how you can build the future. So it's short-term sacrifice for long-term gain. So you really have to stick it in to see the results in that sense.
Well, these resonated with me so much as you're talking through them. I just seeing my first win and knowing that sort of key breakthrough deal, right? Or that mistake. I've made that mistake so many times in terms of not being focused enough and so on. So such great advice here throughout the conversation. So Quentin, really appreciate you taking the time to chat today. If somebody's listening in on this, right, and they're what you're saying is really resonating, they want to chat with you, learn more, or maybe they're interested in Zelt and what you guys are doing specifically, where's the best place for them to find you, to connect with you?
Yes. So I guess the easiest and best route is definitely LinkedIn. You can find me on our company page, Quentin, or directly in the search bar, Quentin space Leroy, LE space ROI. And do connect on LinkedIn. Happy to answer any questions around Zelt or the HR space if you're trying to break into it, or just the UK London scene. Happy to connect. So if you're ever on this side of the pond, always happy to go out for a pint, as we like to say here. So
yeah, well, I'll take you up on that offer as well. I'll let you know next time I'm in the UK. But really, really great chatting today. Thanks so much for the time and all the insight, and have a great day over there.
My pleasure. Thanks again for inviting me in, Justin, and have a good rest of your day.